the stories we tell ourselves. And that's kind of how I've framed it throughout the year. And it was me kind of reflecting on, and when I say stories we tell ourselves, I mean it quite literally, is that there were these subtle narratives. And I think anyone that's self-aware realizes that throughout the day, you're constantly talking to yourself, and that you have a almost a representation of yourself that you're, other people of course get glimpses of because you're interacting and communicating all the time. But then there's also subtleties that you keep to yourself. And why it became so pertinent is like truly was self-reflecting in kind of a meditative state of like, why do I still say that? Or why do I still feel that way? Or why do I still have that insecurity? And where I want to drill down most is in the insecurity realm of it, because that's where I realized, and upon reflecting, realized that there were a lot of things from, say, when I was 11 or 12, and I'll be open, and you've heard me talk about this before, is like, even for me as being, I was so tall at such a young age and I was extremely thin. And my dad and brother would rag on me the way that dad and brother should, in a sense. But like, for some reason, I kind of internalized it as this like extreme insecurity, which then resulted in like almost feeling like, and that's why I told you it's been a great exercise this last month of us having our third daughter, is not being able to work out, because working out when I was 12, it finally gave me the opportunity to be like, oh, I'll put on muscle then, I'll get bigger. And it's good. It's a double-edged sword where like, yes, working out, putting on muscle, even eating more. But there were times almost similar, I would call it like the male body dysmorphia. And it was worse when it was probably the worst when I was in college, where I realized in moments of stressful times, that would become something I would like quadruple and double, or like double down, triple down, quadruple down on, and start like just thinking like, okay, I need to just lift my ass off, eat. I was slamming protein shakes, realizing that like it was good for putting on weight and muscle, but like I didn't feel better when I was doing that. Now, as you know, I'm still very passionate about working out and taking care of my body and being strong, which I think everybody should at least strive to be have some level of strength. But my relationship with it has changed a ton as I've addressed that story that I realized was stemming from a really young age. So that's just a specific example. I could name out a ton, but for the sake of time, I won't. But I think it's just I've been talking with a lot of my friends to say like, be open about those things and have discussions, because you realize it's almost like the scary monster in the closet. And as soon as you open that door and address it, it kind of disperses right away. But as long as you let it be the scary monster in the closet, it's taking up mental energy, and you don't realize how those little things are affecting how you show up, both for yourself and other people. And then what happens is that belief structure results in actions, and then actions are shaping your reality. So there may be 4 insecurities, and I'm sorry, you can sense this on people, like, oh, you got something you haven't really dealt with, and play that out to the most extreme is like, and God bless people that like have something like a serious trauma, like a sexual assault or something at a young age. Now, I'm not saying I've never dealt with that. So like, of course I don't want to speak for them, but you can sense on individuals when they have that monster that they've never worked through. So these are micro examples, but I think it really feels like a cleanup, and almost like you're going in with like a fine tooth comb and saying like, hey, I want to be proud, and I want to feel calm and centered within the way I show up every day. And what I've found, the more you go in and address those stories, and it's not about banishing it either. It's just about observing and saying like, hey, I see you there. Like I see that story I used to tell myself, but I'm not that person anymore. And I think like anything, the more you exercise kind of that, and I'll pause there because I actually like, there's a tactic that Paul Chek, who's I consider a mentor of mine, you replace that statement with something else. So like for mine, that example I just gave would be like, you used to feel like you were skinny, but that doesn't serve you anymore. And I'm making this up in real time. Like you replace it with something that reconfirms a different way of thinking about it. And then anytime it bubbles up, which it's going to, and it probably never fully goes away, you say like, hey, I see you there, and you create like a caveat or an if statement to kind of go against it. So this is like the nerdy side of me nerding out on like kind of our psychology and then how that affects our actions and behaviors. But I just thought that was a good one because it's been such forefront for me of like getting in there and being unafraid to kind of reflect on, in these things, it doesn't have to be from when you're a kid. These can happen when you're 20, 25, you have something traumatic or even something good where you realize it's inflating your ego. It's like, go in there and knock that down a little bit because it just gives you it sands the edges and makes you a little more well-balanced.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think most of us have something from childhood that shapes behavior later on. sometimes it takes a little while to realize like, oh shit, that's why I'm like that. Cause I always wonder, and I think I'm pretty certain on this, being the youngest of three brothers, the dynamic I was in was both of my older brothers were great athletes. Right. To the point where like, Matt was all state in three sports and was the conference MVP in all three sports. And like that last name and of course it's not like big time stuff, but in Northwest Indiana, even in Indiana, that last name started getting recognized because of what my brothers had done. Mike was all state in tennis and baseball, team MVP, like the whole deal. And then my little ass comes along and I'm the third Hanlon, right? So there's expectations. And I developed late physically, right? Like I hit puberty late, I think, relatively. So I was just underdeveloped and undersized when, there's those kids that hit puberty in like 6th grade and then they're like little phenoms in middle school because it's like, dude, you have leg hair in 6th grade. Like, holy shit. You know what I mean? You're scary. So there's, you compound it with that. So, I get to high school and particularly on the football front, there's big expectations. Oh, there's a third one coming. You know what I mean? And Matt was all everything and all-time leading rusher at Valpo. And like the dude just dominated everything. He was insane. Definitely the most talented of all three of us. And Mike was second. I was probably third. But I took that as like, I need to become a hyper achiever, right? I became obsessed with accomplishment because I wanted to prove all these people wrong. And I felt incredible pressure. Now, in the grand scheme of things, I probably was manifesting that in my own head. But there was so much, I was so self-conscious about not living up to the name that I just turned into an absolute maniac. It helped, I lived in the weight room. I committed to eating like a horse. I, would be up till midnight studying, I took all the AP classes. Like I wanted to be really good academically. So it led me to be a little focused maniac, lawn mowing business on the side. If I wasn't working out, I was mowing lawns or studying a book. Right. So I guess like, that part worked out, but I carried that same mentality pretty much until now where I have this like obligation to be a hyper achiever. And yes, there are benefits to that, but there's also collateral damage in your life that will produce, because you got to be a little bit nuts to take that approach, right? And now I'm 36 and I'm like, all right, like, can I take the foot off the gas a little, or do I always have to have the next thing? Like, you know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, well, as soon as you've conquered this, like immediately do this.
And it's what we just, and I told you I'm referencing, I heard it on Diary of a CEO, which is a great podcast if you've never listened to it. And they were talking about that exact thing of like, and it actually relates to what I said about like the stories you tell yourself, like be careful not to continue to live in a narrative that no longer serves you. Meaning like using your example, like that hustle and grit, like nothing of what we're saying or what I'm saying should be viewed as like, oh, that's a bad story that I told myself. It's like, no, that was a great story to get you to hear, but is that story still serving you? And if it's yes, like, or if it's yes, a little bit, but not in these aspects, it's like, hey, rewrite that a little bit and do a new, kind of an updated version of that to better suit your life. And that's what they were talking about, to give the specific example of how they were referencing it, is when he sold his first business, he called his mentor, and I think he was 32 at the time, and said like, okay, here's what I'm going to do next. I'm ready to go. And his mentor, who was much more seasoned than him, said like, take a fucking year. Take a year and don't do anything. Meaning like, don't start anything new. You can still have hobbies and whatnot, but like you're set up financially for the rest of your life. Take a year and don't do anything. And when he was like surprised and shocked and asked why he recommended doing that, he said like, you're going to take like that hustle and that grit you had to make this happen. You just solve for it financially. Now, if you keep doing that mentality over and over, you're just going to exhaust yourself. He's like, give yourself a year and see now what the new thing you want to solve for is, because you just solved for all before. And here's where they get in. I'll paraphrase just to keep this rolling, but like they got into the nuance of the mentor knowing that like he wanted to solve for the financial need because he grew up poor and all this. So he's like, you just solved the exact thing you told, like, he's like, you told me that that's what you're solving for. You solved it. And now you want to keep solving for it. He's like, no, like that. And what a great mentor to say that. And I think it applies to what you said of like, and those are the people I appreciate most in my life, because you see them growing in a way like, whoa, like almost like a phone, like you're doing software updates of like, you get too stuck on a thread, it makes you one dimensional. Whereas when you realize like, okay, I figured that out, now let's solve for something else, you start to, and it relates to the book Range, which I love. Like, you start to build a range where you can step into any room and you're adding value from a weird angle because you've explored these different things and not got too kind of one dimensional on something. Now, there's a time to be one dimensional, but if it's always your MO for operating, I think it kind of like it narrows the scope at which you're able to see reality.
Yeah, no, it's spot on, man.